Welcome back to another episode of I Wish They Knew, a show where leaders in business and education share a tip, practice, or insight they wish others knew more about. I'm Joe Hirsch. Today, we're kicking off a spotlight series on mental health to mark Mental Health Awareness Month. And our guest today is Kelly Greenwood. Kelly is the founder and CEO of Mindshare Partners, a nonprofit that's changing the culture around mental health so that both employees and organizations can thrive. Kelly, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Joe.
So one of the bright spots of this pandemic is that mental health is now elevated within many organizations. So as companies pay more attention to and provide more resources for mental health, what do you wish more people knew?
Well, one thing that I wish that they knew is how common mental health challenges are, especially among high achievers, and the power that leaders have to affect culture change, both within their organization and in society at large.
Why do you think it affects high performers more so than other members of teams?
So I myself have generalized anxiety disorder, which now is very well managed, but twice in my life has led to debilitating depression, including having to take a leave of absence from work. And that's something that I felt a tremendous amount of shame around being a high achiever myself. So it is incredibly common. And for me, I would actually say that my anxiety was a strength in many ways. In a lot of ways, it fueled my ambition, but got out of whack a couple times until I really figured out how to manage it effectively. And so I think we see that in a variety of different mental health conditions, right? So bipolar disorder is relatively common among entrepreneurs, especially. The mania, the creativity that often is associated with that can be a positive and make people, perfectly suited for entrepreneurial ventures. But even regardless of that, pre-pandemic, up to 80% of Americans over the course of their lifetime have a diagnosable mental health condition, whether they know it or not. But were they to walk into a doctor's office, they would meet that criteria. And that might be something that they deal with chronically, like me, or it might be something acute, right? Triggered by a job loss or a death in the family. And we've especially seen that those numbers grow even higher over this last year, given the challenges from the pandemic to the racial reckoning to climate issues, all sorts of things. So this is incredibly common. In a study we did in 2019 in partnership with SAP and Qualtrics, we found that mental health symptoms, and we framed them as symptoms to try to get around the stigma a little bit of people having to self-identify with the condition. Mental health symptoms were equally prevalent from the C-suite to your entry-level individual contributor. And so I think there's very much a misconception that it's your low performers that are struggling, or it's the people that you're wanting to transition out of your organization. It is very much not the case.
Yeah, it's very widespread. I think I read somewhere that the astounding effect on business outcomes is a huge piece of this. Something like 200 million hours a month lost to productivity due to mental health concerns. That's a tremendous impact on businesses' bottom line. So where do companies go to get started? How do you begin to support people as they try to become more whole in their work and in their lives?
Absolutely. There are a variety of different levers that leaders can pull. I think the most senior leaders, people in the C-suite in particular, really do have that power to set the culture of an organization. And so in being vulnerable about their own challenges or speaking in what we call a leader ally capacity, right? Sharing the hopeful story of a friend or family member in a company-wide environment really gives people permission to be able to have that conversation at work. So that's the first thing I would say.
So leaders really will set the course for the care.
Absolutely. So I actually did a training for all the employees of a financial services organization last week and coached the CEO to share his own leader ally story, which was about his children's mental health challenges, but in turn, how they had then gone on with treatment to, be incredibly successful. And a lot of that was actually very parallel to some of my own stories. And the power that he had in doing that and kicking off the session was far greater than anything I could say in the course of that time together, because, I'm an outsider to the company and this is their CEO who, is sharing something quite personal that I don't think he had shared in that kind of format before. And so he just got bombarded by, messages of support, messages of people relating to that. And there's tremendous power in doing that and in building that culture of connection, right? And we want to see that across all levels, every manager having those, authentic conversations with their direct reports. And that may not necessarily be, hey, I'm going to tell you about my mental health challenge. We don't advocate disclosure to anybody who's not comfortable, and that's totally fine. But really, just being real and saying, my kid had a temper tantrum this morning and I'm having a really rough day, or man, Zoom school is really, really crappy at my house. And there's just so much to juggle and I'm feeling really stressed. When we talk about mental health within the context of Mindshare partners, we're really talking about that full spectrum, right? From, total wellness, which is, I would say 0% of us, to not doing so great. And that ranges from stress to burnout, to a diagnosable mental health condition like depression or anxiety. So it's really that whole thing. And especially in this last year, I'd be hard pressed to find anybody that could honestly say that they hadn't struggled with mental health.
So leaders really do set the culture, but what about systemic supports that organizations can introduce to make sure that people are really getting their needs met?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking that. I think that is such an important consideration because it's not just the person and their brain chemistry that's the challenge, right? There are so many different workplace factors like flexibility, like having autonomy over your role that affect and can exacerbate mental health challenges, right? So we really want to encourage, especially as we move back into, a new normal or move into that new normal, what can workplaces do and not just go back to the old way of being, but thinking about how to support the mental health of all of their employees by flexing some of these levers.
So leaders definitely have a large role to play in this, in shaping the culture of connection. But what can individuals do if there isn't yet a formal system of support in place? How can colleagues and friends look out for one another and spot those early warning signs before things get out of hand?
Definitely. So, I think a lot of that, again, colleagues can create that culture of connection, that safety. They're seeing people over time. What I do want to caution against is not trying to diagnose your colleagues or your direct reports, unless you are a trained therapist and that's your role in your company. There are a host of things that could look like a mental health condition, but might actually just be, the person didn't get very much sleep because they were binge watching Netflix, right? And they've
Right.
been doing that to cope with pandemic stress. So you never want to make assumptions about what's going on with someone. But one of the things that we have seen come to the fore in the last few years, which has been really exciting for me, are mental health employee resource groups or affinity groups. And anyone can start that. And we often see that those being started by the youngest employees, millennials, Gen Z, who grew up in therapy, who grew up going to high schools and colleges where there were clubs, encouraging folks to talk about their mental health. And then all of a sudden they roll into the workplace and it becomes taboo again. And so there's this fantastic culture clash happening in terms of especially younger employees really wanting to have these conversations, wanting to have a mentally healthy culture. So, I would say that that's one thing, but just checking in on folks. It's not rocket science, but it goes so far, and both that give and take. Another thing that I would say that anyone could do, and this is especially powerful, if you're in a manager role, but even in a colleague type of relationship, modeling mentally healthy behaviors.
Yeah.
Whether that is going so far as to put therapy on your appointment if you're a manager, to give permission for your team to do the same during the workday, or saying, hey, I'm, going for a workout during lunch, or hey, I'm going to meditate, or, I'm trying to make sure I get X amount of sleep. So these things that people understand what they're doing, or, blocking out, focused work time versus meetings, so that other people, really understand that it's okay to take care of yourself. Other people are taking care of themselves. And I think especially as many of us are still working remotely, given the pandemic, and the personal and professional have become so blurry that it's okay to stop working at a certain time, right? You don't need to be working constantly just because your laptop in your workplace is at your home.
Yeah, those are great wishes. Thank you, Kelly, for sharing your wish with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.